So it is time to start. So type in the chat box where you're from, and hopefully you brought questions tonight. Hopefully you're starting to do some gardening and you're running into problems, not because we want you to, but because I can hopefully answer some of your questions. I certainly can't answer them all, but I have been getting my hands dirty for 40 years. So hopefully we can make this happen. So it'll be fun. Okay. Letting a few people in here. I've got to figure out how to see my chat box. Blackfoot, Idaho, gardening. No gardening. We had 7 inches of snow this week. We got that same storm right here just across the border in northern Nevada. We had about 7 inches of snow. I took the tape measure out and I was poking it in the ground. Some places it was 6 inches, some places it was 8 inches. So that was pretty awesome. Snow is a good thing. Okay. I'm going to get started here. And I'm going to move a couple of things around on my screen a little bit so I can see my slide. Ezekiel, can you see my screen? Is it sharing right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so a lot of people in the world are talking about soil health and regenerative agriculture and permaculture and all these types of agriculture. They seem to be new trends in the world in the last however many years. These are really not new trends. A lot of these things are just the way people have always done agriculture, but there are some key things that people are learning now with our new modern science that is quite a bit different than what people have done in the past. So there's a couple of key things that are different, but the thing that has really been new in the last 100 years is the idea of gigantic machinery and lots of chemicals, lots of man-made inputs. So that is the new thing that we're actually dealing with. And it's interesting that we can grow a lot of food with those systems, except after 60, 70 years on some of the farmland that's been getting all those inputs, it's becoming harder and harder to maintain those yields. We have to keep coming up with new things to do. And when we're doing nutritional tests on the food, we're finding that the food raised in other systems, like I'll just say regenerative agriculture, that includes dozens of different methods, but where you have really good soil health, the food tends to test out more healthy than with systems where you have monocrops on vast acres. And I'm not against, any type of agriculture. Anytime we can grow food and keep people fed, it's a good thing. But I do think that there are better ways, and it remains to be seen in human history the sustainability of our modern systems. And there's a lot of people who like to talk the way I'm talking right now, and they get really irate about it. And they say that anybody using chemical agriculture is wrong and wicked and evil. I don't believe that. But I do know what happens in the soil when soil functions. And we can grow really good, the best food ever, with a regenerative type agriculture where we're keeping the soil working and the ecosystem processes are working very well. That is sustainable. We know we can keep that going. We can keep that going on a peasant level, meaning we don't have to have the great big giant factories, the cities, all of those things to fuel the food production. Anybody with a family group can produce food almost indefinitely. That is not the world we live in. So when I do talk, sometimes I'm accused of being idealistic, and I like that. I take that as a compliment because I think we should go after ideals. It's really important. So it's no longer a question at all for me if regenerative agriculture and soil health, the whole permaculture movement, the organic movement, those things absolutely work. Sometimes people who are screaming about it the hardest are not even growing any food, and that's frustrating to me on a personal level. But let's move into our main topic tonight, which is right here. So our main topic tonight is proper handling of produce after we harvest. So I get this question a lot because, and I don't really get a specific question, but over the years, people have had a lot of questions, and usually it's in the form of a complaint. It does not have a question mark on the end of the sentence. They're not actually forming a question and asking me, but really they are asking. But they will say things like, oh yeah, I would grow lettuce, except it never tastes good. It's always bitter. Or they say, when I go out and pick all my stuff from the garden, it's wilty by the time I get to the house. It's no good. I don't like it. People struggle with keeping things fresh. People struggle with keeping things tasting good. Now, if we're growing our own food, it's actually the highest quality food in the world. It should be the highest quality food in the world. It doesn't mean that it is, but it certainly can be. It has the potential to be the very best food because we are in control of what's happening to that food. Here again, a lot of the organic people, they will start getting really excited when I say this, and they say, oh yeah, that's great because you're not spraying all that junk on it. That's true. I do agree with that, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's a small percentage of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the tastes, the flavors, the colors, the culinary quality of things in the kitchen, the eating delight. Those are the things that we can have. I actually like to watch a lot of cooking shows on TV. And I've heard chefs over the years, over the decades, I've heard a lot of chefs say, you cannot make good food with poor quality ingredients. You have to start with really good, fresh ingredients. The fresher, the better. And one reason some of the best chefs in the world are in big cities is because there are grocers in those cities that source food that's fresh from the fields that are in those cities or nearby. And that fresh food comes in every day. And because the cities have such a high population, the food is consumed daily. And so fresh food comes in every day. And I'm not talking about fresh food that has been on a truck for 6 weeks. That's another thing that the people screaming organic like to argue about, is they say, yeah, some of that stuff has been on a truck for 6 weeks. And that's true. If you're getting food at places that have a low bid for their produce, it has been in warehouses, places like Walmart. They have a low bid on their produce almost all the time. So it's the last produce, and it's usually the lowest quality. So once you get it home, then you put it in your fridge. Yeah, that lettuce can be spoiled in 2 or 3 days. And you're frustrated by that. I understand the frustration. But what I'm talking about with the chefs who have the highest quality food, the food gets picked in the morning at sunrise, maybe even before sunrise, and it's packaged, it's loaded onto a truck, it drives into the city. By 10 o'clock, those chefs are beginning to cook their food for the day. And that's why some of these people have become such famous chefs. They won such great rewards, is because they're able to source the best produce ever. And these are the kind of niche markets that farmers need to get into to be able to make a good living farming. So in your own gardens, in my garden, what do I do? So I'm just going to tell you what I do in my garden to keep food super fresh, and it's all right here on this slide. So if the weather is hot, you want to make sure that you are cooling your produce quickly. And how do you do that? Well, if you plunge it into ice water, that will cool it quickly. Some produce lasts longer, has a longer shelf life if you don't get it wet. So sometimes keeping it dry is a great thing. You don't want to keep it wet because it can, if there's any kind of bacteria on it, it can start going slimy. We've all seen lettuce in the fridge and it starts to decompose and it gets super slimy. The most common organism that does that is called Erwina. And it's the same organism, I've been told, I'm really not an expert on this, but I have been told that it's the same organism that causes fire blight on trees. But it makes that lettuce go nasty. If you keep your lettuce dry after picking it, it does have a longer shelf life. But after saying that, let me be really clear. When I go to my greenhouse, if I pick before the produce, any produce starts to photosynthesize, that means that it needs to be dark and cold. So in the morning, even in the heat of summer, the hottest months of the year, if you're out there, it's had all night to cool off. And so if you're out there at 5 in the morning, just as it's getting light and the sun's coming up, and you pick delicate things like lettuce, and you bring them into the house and you put them in the fridge, they will last. I've had lettuce in the fridge for over 14 days. And when I get it out, the quality looks the very same as the day I picked it. We've had people ask us, how long will this last? I don't know how long it will last. So I did side-by-side tests. And I thought, okay, well, we're just going to pick some romaine here. We're going to pick some red sales lettuce. We're going to pick some pom-pom lettuce, just all these different varieties. Well, let's even cut some, let's cut some baby lettuce and let's just bag it up like we sell it. And then we will put it in the fridge and then let's check on it. You know, we know it'll last a week and then let's just start checking on it. So a week and a half went by, 13, 14, 15, but like 14 and 15 days, we're getting that lettuce out and looking at it and we are comparing it to something we picked today. And that lettuce is just as good. It looks the same. It tastes the same. Everything is really nice. And after 2 weeks, we thought, that made us happy. So we didn't keep going with the experiment to see. So we didn't worry about whether it was, if it was taking, a month to go bad or whatever. And we didn't do anything weird with it. We didn't wash it. We didn't put it in water. We didn't cool it. We didn't do anything. We just cut it before it starts to photosynthesize. So 4:35 in the morning in June in July when it's the longest days of the year, because once the sun comes up and it hits those leaves, you've got the stomata, which are the pores in the leaf, and they open because the sun hits them and that triggers those little cells to open, and that lets the carbon dioxide in so that the plant can grow, so it can photosynthesize. And then when that happens, if you cut it after those pores open, then that's when they start to wilt. So quite often I have people that come to my greenhouse here and it's the middle of the day and it's warm and the sun's shining beautiful, it's 11 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon or whatever, but that plant is it's growing away. All those tomatoes are wide open and people come and they want to pick fresh things, and it's fine. I pick it fresh and I send it out to them. Quite often I will put some heads of lettuce under the cold tap water to kind of cool it off so it will last longer, but sometimes I don't. And I've not really had people complain that their stuff wilted, but I know that if I cut something in the middle of the day when the pores of those plants are open, the moisture will evaporate out and things will go wilty. So that is one of the main things. Pick your produce, all of your produce, early in the morning before the sun hits it. It can be getting light, but once the sun rays actually hit the produce, those stomata will open and you will be losing moisture from that plant. Even if you take it and you put it in the fridge right away, it takes a while for that to shut down. So what do you do if you have a big field and you have to harvest during the middle of the day, or if you don't want to get up early and you need to harvest in the middle of the day? What can you do? It's pretty simple. Let's say it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you have some beautiful lettuce. I keep saying lettuce is the example because lettuce is one of the easiest things to mess up. It's one of the hardest things to keep fresh and nice. So if you can get lettuce good, you can get anything to be good. So it's 3 in the afternoon, you've got your lettuce and you want it to stay like super crisp and wonderful. Here's what I would do. I would cut it and then I would take it in the house and I would get a pan of water, the coldest water coming out of the tap, and put a couple of trays of ice in that water. And then you put your lettuce in there for about 5 minutes so that you are completely cooling off that lettuce. That will cool it down so that, and then it won't wilt on you. Now, if you wait for an hour before you get it from your garden to your house, it's already wilty. So you have to cut it, plunge it in ice water immediately. I do know that some of the farms, commercial farms, who are harvesting a lot of stuff, and it takes them all day to harvest, and they have big semi trucks out in the fields, they will fill those semi trucks like a quarter of the way with ice. They just have huge ice machines. And in the morning, they'll fill that truck with ice like a quarter of the way, and then another quarter of the way with water. So it's half full of ice water. And then they will just dump produce in those semi trucks. And then from there, they take it to the processing plant. But what that does is it removes that field heat from the whatever the produce is. And that way you don't get the wilting effect. So what about winter time? Winter time is a problem too. I've had people with greenhouses and they say, okay, so we grew all this great stuff in the winter time. We grew it the way you said, but then when I go out there and pick it, it's nasty. When I get it in the house and a couple hours later, it's like going slimy and gross and it's falling apart. The reason it does that is you picked it in the morning and it was still frozen. So there's a lot of crops that can freeze at night in a greenhouse in the winter, and then you can harvest them and eat them. But if you harvest while they're frozen, like in the morning, then they're not good. Like spinach, kale, lettuce, there's a lot of these things, and the quality can severely be hurt if you pick them while they're frozen. So you have to wait till the afternoon in the winter time to harvest those. So that's kind of opposite of what I said about, about the other, like in the summertime. So if your crops are growing in a high tunnel, in a kind of a greenhouse, in a solar greenhouse, and it's dead of winter, let's say it's January and it's 30 below outside, and it got down to let's say it got down to 28 degrees in your greenhouse. You have a whole bunch of beautiful lettuce in there. Just wait till the sun comes up and it thaws out. And it could be thawed out by 10 o'clock. It could get up to, 38, 40 degrees in there. That will thaw out your crops. Once they thaw out and there's no more ice crystals within those leaves, then you can pick them and then you can go do whatever you're going to do with them. And those will keep your crops super healthy and happy. So if you're running a business, you need to know this. If you're going to be taking bags of salad to a grocery store, or if you have just local customers, you need to know this so that they can get a super high quality product all the time. Because if they get something that's wilty and nasty and then just throw it away, that's frustrating to people. People don't like that. So you just wash it and package it quickly, remove that field heat. In the winter time, harvest in the afternoon once crops have thawed out. In the summertime, harvest in the early morning before the sun hits your crops. And those are the ideal ways to harvest. Once you have things harvested, keep your greenhouse, not your greenhouse, your walk-in cooler. That's what I tried to say. Keep your walk-in cooler or your fridge or whatever, wherever you're harvesting and keeping things stored. Keep it around 35 to 38 degrees. 40 degrees is fine. And depending on the species, different species of plants actually have their optimal temperature for harvesting. But most of the people that I deal with, they're eating this food pretty quick. They're not shipping it long distances. It's not the type of thing where you're wanting to move produce and have it be good for 2 or 3 weeks. So Like I think any farmers I've ever dealt with, their customers have the food within 24 hours, at least 48 hours after harvesting. So I've never really looked into the perfect temperatures for each species of crop because I've never needed to. So the thing is, gardening is it's a pretty huge hobby, and for some people, it's a pretty important business. But it's really important to understand that as like say you're starting to garden for the first time, or you have new customers who are purchasing food from you, you've got to help these people understand that there's a certain way to cook food so that it is good. I hear people say, I don't really like vegetables. I've had an experience where somebody said, I don't like beets. I told them how good beets were, and I told them how to cook them and all this stuff. And then like 6 months later, I ate at their house and they said, oh yeah, you said you liked beets, so we cooked some. They weren't very good. I didn't tell the people that, but I thought, you know what, if this is how beets taste, I don't like them either. So when we're cooking with food from the garden, don't just assume that garden food is bad. What you need is to work at it and make it taste good. It's just like bread. You know, I mean, bread's pretty good food, but you can make bread that's pretty bad. It's just like meat. You know, it's pretty good food, but you could make it bad. Eggs are good food, but you could make them really bad. You ever eaten like really burned eggs? They're not very good. So it's not the garden's fault. It's not the produce fault. It's a lack of skill and education when it comes to preparing food. So make the food taste good by learning a little bit about cooking. Now, when it comes to times of scarcity, any type of like food shortage or food is high priced, food is non-existent, and we're trying to live off of foods, drying foods is really a good thing to do because you can dry foods in almost every climate, even very humid climates, you can still dry food. So when you have an abundance of food, drying food is great for challenging times because food is, or drying food, the dehydrated foods, they retain most of their nutrition. They retain a lot more nutrition than bottling foods. It's better than freezing foods. And if there's times of famine and like hard times, there could be possibilities of power outages in certain parts of the world. So freezing may not be the best thing to do, but drying food is really, really good. And one of the best ways to store dried food is in a mason jar. You just put the dried food in there, whatever it is, and you can store it in mason jars because it keeps insects out of it and it keeps rodents out. So it's a pretty good way to go. Let me move to my next slide here. So this is a slide that I showed. It was either last week or the week before, I forgot. I think it was 2 weeks ago, but anyway, so I showed this slide. So I'm done with this slide. Now I'm going to go to the next slide, but this is the slide that I showed on what to grow in hard times. So I made a new slide. It has the very same list on here. So these are the same things to grow, but today I'm just going to talk about, like, you know, to just keep on our subject of how we're handling food when we grow it. What is the best way to store these things if we were going to store these? And these are just basics. These are so basic. And people have known this stuff for hundreds and hundreds of years. You can read in ancient literature the very same thing I'm going to tell you right now. But in the last 4 or 5 generations, we have lost a lot of the basics. So if we hit hard times with some of the challenges that the world is seeing right now, and you're able to produce some food, here are some easy old time ways to put things together so that you can have good food to eat without a lot of like technical or hard labor. It's not going to cost a lot of money. Okay, so if you're growing dried beans and dried corn, you can just put them in a 5-gallon bucket with a lid. That keeps mice out, it keeps all kinds of rodents out, and it keeps insects out. That's a good way to go. So the 5-gallon bucket is really good. If you go to the last one here, which is number 21, which is the cereal grains, if you're going to grow any of those, 5-gallon buckets is a good way to keep those. We have 5-gallon buckets. They're readily available. They will last for years and years. They're good. And you don't need anything special to, just make sure you're not cracking them and breaking them. When you take the lids off, take them off gently so that you're not breaking the lids. And they could last for a long, long time. So what about like a summer squashes? Can you save summer squashes? Yes, you can. You can dry them. You would slice those up and you would dehydrate them like fruit, any other fruit. They are a fruit actually because they grow from a flower. So any kind of fruit that you would just slice up and you would dry those, and then you could store that dried stuff in a 5-gallon bucket. Now, what about winter squashes? Now, somebody asked me the other day about growing winter squashes, and they thought that you grew them in the winter. So I want to be clear here that summer squashes, they grow in the summer, and winter squashes grow in the summer. They both grow in the summer. The summer squashes, you eat them in the summertime because they don't have a long shelf life, or you could dry them for use later. But winter squashes have a very long shelf life. Some of them can last for 8 months. Most of them have a shelf life of a good 5 months. So you could put those in a root cellar. And root cellars are a wonderful thing to have because they will stay pretty cold. They'll stay around, who knows, 50 degrees, whatever, all year long, a properly built root cellar. And that is with no electricity. It's just the way you design it and build it. So get you a backhoe, dig you a root cellar, build you some walls on a roof, cover it with dirt, have some good ventilation. You want to keep a bucket of water in there so that it stays humid. You need humidity in a root cellar. Potatoes are good for a root cellar. If all you grew were potatoes, you might feel hungry, but it would get you through a winter. Cabbages can last for a long time in a root cellar. But if you're going to grow cabbages for a root cellar, they need to ripen about the time your first snows fly. So you would want to plant your cabbages in the summer. You grow them through the summer and the fall, and then they ripen late in the year. And so you would just have to look to see how your look at the variety and how many days it takes from seed to harvest. And then you would just look at your calendar and count backwards from when your first snowstorms come, which is usually about 4 or 5 weeks after your first killing frost. And so that's pretty good indication of when to grow cabbages. And what I do, I just pull them up from the roots, and then I tie a string around the roots and I hang them in the root cellar. So you wouldn't take any leaves off. All the big giant leaves around the cabbage, you just leave those on there, and they will deteriorate first, but they will be feeding the center part of the cabbage. So that's a pretty awesome thing. Spinach, just grow that fresh. You could probably dehydrate it if you wanted to, but I don't think there's a point, because anybody with or without a greenhouse, you could grow spinach all year round. If you have any protection at all along the south side of a house, a couple of windows, making a little lean-to against your house, stuff like that, you could very easily and simply grow spinach all year long. So just grow it fresh. And kale is the same way. If you jump down to number 11, just grow it fresh year round. So those are things that can grow all the time, unless you're living in somewhere like Alaska where you don't have any light. But if you have any light and you don't have super deep snow, you could rig up a tiny little cold frame and grow a few fresh greens all year. And spinach and kale are probably the best because they're packed with protein and vitamins. Very, very good. Onions, keep those in the root cellar. Beets, root cellar, and you would want to pack those in sand. So beets and carrots, if you had just 5-gallon buckets, so you would put you would cover the bottom So you'd put in like 30 carrots in a 5-gallon bucket, and then you'd put some wet sand in there, like 6 or 8 cups or something. And then you would put more carrots in, and then more sand, more carrots, more sand, until your bucket is full. And you want the sand to be somewhat wet. You don't want water pouring out of it, but it needs to be wet sand that you put in there. And those carrots, you will be able to pull those out of that sand all through the winter, just like you're pulling them out of the ground outside. Now, if you live in an area where you can just have them outside, leave them in the garden and dig them all winter, that's great. Where I live, I don't do that because the ground can freeze hard. And so I like to have them in the root cellar because it's easier to get them. And I just grow them year round in my solar greenhouse. So that's the benefit of having a solar greenhouse, is you can have a lot of those things just in the greenhouse all the time too. So sweet potatoes, they will store well in a root cellar. Make sure you have high humidity in those root cellars. Sweet potatoes will wilt down if you don't have high enough humidity. Tomatoes, dry those things. Sun-dried tomatoes go in hundreds of recipes. Very, very good. So garlic, you harvest that in the summer and it will last a long time. I would hang that up in like a cloth bag, hanging in your kitchen or garage, probably with a little bit less humidity than a root cellar. So a kitchen, a garage, a mudroom type situation might be a little bit better for the garlic. Cucumbers, pickle those things. There's nothing like a good pickle. If you don't like pickles, you disagree with that, but that is the best way to keep the cucumbers. Melons, there are certain varieties of melons you can keep in a root cellar. There's one called a Christmas melon, and that's because you grow it in the summer, and then when you harvest it in the fall, you can put it in a root cellar and it just sits there, and they'll be good on Christmas because they have about a 3 or 4 month shelf life in a root cellar. So, and there's quite a few varieties of melons that will do that. Not all of them, but there's a good handful for sure. So peppers, I love dried peppers. They work very good. That's probably the best way to preserve peppers. Peas are very good dried. Of course, I'm talking about the seed of the pea. If it's a shell pea or a snow pea, if you have so many that you can't eat them all, you planted too many, just eat that stuff fresh in the season when it's fresh. Don't worry about trying to dehydrate those guys. I guess you could if you wanted. That'd be interesting. I've never tried it because I never could dream of a recipe that it would work in. Berries, that's where the sugar is in all the different fun fruits you can grow. You can make preserves and jams. You can certainly dry those. If you have a freeze dryer, that'd be awesome for almost everything on this list, but berries would be great in a freeze dryer. Lentils, of course, they are dried and would store well in a 5-gallon bucket. Okay, let's see if I had another. Maybe I had another slide. I have a slide right here. Let me turn on my chat. Okay, Ezekiel, do we have any questions that are specific to what I talked about tonight?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Let me see right here. So we have 3 that are in the chat right here. Okay. The first is what resources do you have for pickling and fermenting?
Okay, so I'm a lot better at growing this stuff than cooking this stuff. I'm not the expert on the cooking. There are other people in my life who have done that. My mother was awesome at it. My wife is great at it. So I'm probably not the expert to tell you. What resources? My friends who do it so that I can enjoy eating it. I don't have a good resource for that. So let me think about that. I mean, I've read books on it, but I really don't know. But you did mention fermenting. Fermenting is wonderful because it increases the nutritional value, like making sauerkraut and kimchi. Those are very good fermented foods, extremely nutritious, wonderful, wonderful ways to preserve food. I highly recommend it, but if I had to do it, I couldn't. So that's a part of my education that is lacking. Okay, let's go to the next one, Zeke.
The next one is, can you walk us through how to build a good root cellar?
Oh, yeah. So we have a pretty awesome root cellar here that was built in the early 1900s here on the ranch. And it's working very, very good. It does not freeze in the winter. We got down to -8 Fahrenheit. It only has one door on it, and that cold air did not penetrate inside. It has about 4 to 6 feet of dirt on the sides, and then as you go up towards the top, there's about 2 feet of dirt on top. And the sides of that thing are made out of stone because it was built a long time ago. So a stonemason just stacked up square blocks, but they were not cut stone. It was just big, beautiful native stone. So they don't fit together perfectly like bricks. So there was just a skilled stone worker who put those together. And so that's all 4 walls are that way. And then it just has a normal door on hinges. And then the roof had, I don't know what it had on it originally, probably just poles, but then somebody put railroad ties on it, but then it smelled like creosote, which was really nasty. And sometimes that wouldn't, if you stored fresh foods in there like potatoes, then the potatoes would stay that way. So it was getting that poisonous stuff into the food. So the first year I came here to the ranch, which was basically last year, we replaced the roof of that with some heavy duty corrugated steel. It's and it's, when I say corrugated steel, it's not like roofing tin. It was like super thick. It's a lot thicker than sheet metal, but it was kind of like sheet metal, except it was probably like 1/8 of an inch thick. It was really heavy. But they when they make concrete floors in places and there's a roof, then this would be the roof underneath, and then the concrete floor is on top. And you can buy that material. I don't know what it's called, but you can buy it at Home Depot. It's just a normal building material. And so that's what the roof is made out of. We put that on there, and then we just covered it with the backhoe on top, and we left the original stone wall around it. But the door of your root cellar should have a vent toward the bottom, maybe 18 inches high off the ground, but it needs to be screened with a fine screen so that animals can't get in. You don't want mice and rats and cats and birds getting into your root cellar. So it needs to be well vented. And then on the other side of your root cellar, you need a vent going out the top. And that way the air will flow through the bottom and then go out the top. I think every family in America should have a root cellar, but here again, I'm being idealistic. Yeah, that's how I would build it. Obviously, if you're building this in a place that cares about building codes, which is most of the United States now, you're going to need to check with somebody in your county, and they probably have some regulations on what to do. Although there's a lot of places, especially in rural areas, where if a place is under like a building, if it's under 200 square feet, then you don't have to get a building permit. So, but it might be nice to still talk to an engineer or somebody, just so you're not going to build something that you're going to die. You don't want to walk in there and it caves in and it kills you. You don't want that to happen. So if you don't know anything about construction, certainly consult with somebody. But those are the basics. The other thing is make it big enough that it actually works, but yeah, just bury it in the ground. We built one to put my compost in. It was just a storage container. The problem with storage containers is you can crush them if you put too much dirt around them. So don't put too much dirt around them and it'll be fine. But a storage container would work really good. And if you don't know what I mean by a storage container, I'm talking about one of those big shipping containers that they put stuff in and then they ship it across the oceans. They put thousands of those on big old ships that go across the ocean. So that would work too. But you'd still need to put vents in it. You want that natural airflow to go through. And if you find that it's too warm in the summer, then you would close your vent down. And if it's too cold in the winter and it's freezing in there, close your vents. But you do need some venting going on. So that's everything I know about root cellars. All right, Zeke, what else?
What is the best method for dehydrating?
I think probably freeze drying is good if you have a freeze dryer, if you can get one. If you have a group of friends, go in on one together. I don't know, because they can be pricey. But you know, if you had 5 people, you could go in on one together, and then between your 5 gardens, you could dehydrate a lot of awesome stuff. As far as nutrition goes, and then shelf life, I think dehydrating or the freeze dryer is probably the best, but it's expensive initially to get the freeze dryer. And in times of societal breakdown, it does take electricity to run. So you got to think about that too. Other than that, just slice up your food, put it on cookie sheets and set it outside in the sun for a week. You know, obviously you have to protect it from insects and animals, birds. They'll try to eat your food, but that's, I mean, that's a great way to do it. That's how the pioneers have done it forever. They would just cut up the extra produce, set it in the sun. There's a lot of people today. I bet you there's millions of people today who use their rooftop as a place to put out dried produce, and once it dries, then they put it in something secure and hide it in wherever they hide it, in their pots, in their root cellar, in their basements, or hang it up. Yeah. One more thing on dehydrating though, they sell those dehydrators that are small and they have a little fan that's running. Those are fine, but I mean, they're kind of small. I've never seen one that's very big. Because when I think of dehydrating something, if I'm going to do sun-dried tomatoes, I want to do like 8 or 9 or 10 5-gallon buckets of tomatoes in one day. I just want to spend 6 hours and get them out there. Well, you'd fill your little tiny dehydrator up that you buy, you know, your little tiny one that sits on the counter, you'd fill that up in 10 minutes. So what are you going to do with all your other stuff? So that's why I'm saying, if you're actually talking about producing an abundance of food, there's other ways to do it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on dehydrating. What's next, Ezekiel? Is that it for those about our presentation tonight?
Those are the only ones that came in the chat tonight. I do have another one here that I think is very relevant to what we discussed. There are many people concerned that holistic/regenerative agriculture is significantly less efficient than traditional agriculture, especially per square foot. What do you have to say about this?
I would say that their concerns are based on a lack of proper education. Because I have seen a lot of people who are doing the regenerative agriculture model, and they are like, it's insignificant. It's like let's talk about maybe corn per acre. Instead of having like 180 bushels of corn per acre, they're getting 170 bushels. So it was 10 bushels less doing regenerative agriculture. But their profit margins were a lot more because they didn't buy the most expensive inputs for that corn, which was fertilizer, you know, pesticides, herbicides, whatever else. Now, if you just go cold turkey, and you're a farmer who is raising crops, and let's say you have your 100-acre farm and you have been farming it in the old way, like, let me be clear, you're using the man-made inputs of all the chemicals and all the fertilizers, all the man-made stuff, and you grow that crop of corn, then the corn is going to it's going to give you like a normal harvest that you can count on every year with those inputs. And then you hear somebody talk about regenerative agriculture and saying you don't need all this stuff. Most farmers don't believe it in the first place, so it's not a real problem. But there have been people who said, oh, well, okay, And so they stopped doing all those inputs and they didn't get a harvest at all. And then they spread all these rumors like, oh, it didn't work at all. The biology didn't work. It wasn't working. Well, that's because there was nothing in the soil to work. We're assuming that with regenerative agriculture that your soil is functioning. So you would need to take 5 years and build your soil to a functioning level so that it is supplying life to your plants. Because without the man-made inputs of the fertilizer and the other things that you may need, then you're not going to produce it. So anytime I hear that kind of an argument, that is simply somebody who they haven't done the research. They haven't looked at the whole picture. They haven't looked at the big picture involved here and what we're actually talking about. You know, they're looking at the small picture. They're looking at the symptoms instead of the causes. Okay, Zeke, what's next? Did that answer the question? I may have got off a little bit.
No, I believe that answered the question very well. We do have a request for you to go back to your slide on foods to grow in famine.
Foods to grow in a famine. Take a screenshot of this. So foods to grow in a famine. Okay, everybody type in the chat box here. Tell me if you say yes if you believe a famine is coming. Say no if you don't believe it's coming. Not that I want to cause contention. That's not my purpose. I just think there's a famine coming and it's just interesting. There's a lot of yeses coming up here. So I've been doing some research on this week. There's 5 or 6 like major, like really smart people in the world that I've been looking at, and they are saying that, yeah, there's a famine coming. It's obvious. It's been coming for years now, like 3 years. Like before COVID, there were serious problems with food production in the world. And then COVID hit, and we know all the troubles that happened, so I don't need to talk about that. There's all these supply chains and all these crazy things broken down. And then and now there's the war in Russia and Ukraine, and there's all kinds of other things happening that the news doesn't even talk about. I don't even know what the news talks about because I don't listen to it, but it's just fascinating to see what's happening. The thing is, here's what people are still saying, which frustrates me. So, and they're not wrong, okay? The people saying this are brilliant people, but they're not wrong. I shouldn't say but, okay? Here's what they're saying. They're saying, yeah, there's going to be a big famine, and the poor people of the earth are going to suffer terrible because they won't have enough money to buy the high-priced food. I agree with that 100% to the point that there is food to put a high price on. But I think there are going to be demographics in the world that there simply won't be food to put a high price on. I've heard this thing just this week. Somebody, I forgot where it was, so I can't cite it for you, but you could probably find it in a 15-minute search online. But they said we're going to have to steal from the hungry to give to the starving. And that was a government leader in the United States who said that. And they said it like that was a good solution. When I heard it, I didn't hear what they said after it because I burst out laughing. It was so absurd. So there's an American politician or some kind of an elected leader. I don't know who they were. But it was just hilarious to me that that is the kind of thoughts that go through their head. Why don't people grow some food? See, gardening has been a hobby for so long that we just think it's a hobby. It's not food. Gardening is a hobby that you do for whatever reason. It doesn't really feed anybody. That's the mentality. And it's nuts because you could grow an amazing amount of food on 2 or 3 acres. I have friends who make their living off of less than 1 acre of land. They're not rich, and they're hoping to get 2 or 3 acres eventually so that they can make like a real salary. But I mean, they're paying their bills and they're getting by. They're way overemployed than a lot of people who lost their jobs during COVID and still don't have employment to this day. Anyway, I don't know. I'm getting excited and political, but it's insane. We just need to be growing food, grow a lot of food. So I don't know if this, so anyway, yeah, I mean, there's the slide. Did you have any other questions about this slide other than that picture? I mean, there it is. So
if anyone has any additional questions, please place them in chat. Although, Paul, I do have a couple more questions here that I feel like are very relevant to everything you just went over.
Okay, go ahead and ask one. Let's hear it.
So the first is, how much land do you think someone needs to actually make a living at farming? Like, what do you think the bare minimum is?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so if I was actually working with this person as a consultant, which I do, I would say, what food product are you going to grow? And then they would have to tell me. And if they say cattle, I'd say, okay, so you want to make your living raising and selling beef. You probably need 500 acres. But 500 acres in the Great Basin Desert is very different than 500 acres in Georgia or Arkansas or North Dakota, because they're very different things. They're very different operations. The amount of feed that grows is very different. If your answer was, I want to grow like herbs and sell them to chefs, then I would say you need 2 greenhouses in your backyard with about maybe 6,000 square feet of growing space. And, you know, and you're cutting culinary herbs, things like rosemary, thyme, oregano, you know, an array of herbs, whatever the market is. It would be a greenhouse operation. If you said just a fresh array of vegetables, I would say half an acre to 2 acres. So yeah, hopefully that's a ballpark to give you some ideas.
Awesome. So we got another question in chat. I'm interested in a solar greenhouse. Do you have a resource for me to look into?
I'm a pretty cool resource. You should come to my boot camp and you can look at my greenhouse. Yeah, I guess it depends what you mean by a solar greenhouse. There's probably 10,000 different kind of greenhouses out there. Here's the answer is yes, I'm the resource. Other than that, no. I don't have, like, I don't spend a lot of time like searching this stuff, so I don't even know what's online nowadays for super great like resources for greenhouses. But I've built about 30 greenhouses in my life. Quite a few of them have been solar greenhouse. The best one I've ever built is the one where I'm living right now. Yeah, why not? Let's just do this here. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it fast. I'll show you a resource for a greenhouse. Let me pull up some slides. Here you go. You asked for it, so here you go. May 2020, that's me and my daughter looking at a piece of land. I was hired to consult for building a greenhouse. And so this is a couple of months later when we broke ground. And here I am on the bulldozer just getting situated. Jared showed me this bulldozer and how to drive it right here. It's what he's doing, is teaching me. And I scraped off all of the topsoil and made a big pile. And then we brought in boulders from locally. They were just in the field right over to the top of this this backhoe. You can see the field out there. That's where all these boulders came from. So I built a wall that was 130 feet long and 10 feet tall out of these boulders. And then we just, and so you can see the inside where the greenhouse is going right there. So what I'm doing right there is I'm looking through a makeshift transit to level my lines to put my posts in. And we put just a frame on there. We just went to a junkyard and got scrap steel pipe that because you can get a lot cheaper than new. And we welded this together. We were welding there and we saw that rainbow, so we knew that God liked it too. And then we took this tiller in here to smooth things out, and we smoothed it completely out because you got to realize it's a huge construction zone right now. And we just picked up all the stone locally. Those are big flat stones that I made the steps with in the greenhouse. And then we rocked this whole thing in so you can't get in there with a tractor anymore. That way I'll never be tempted. So this is August right here. And I worked on this every day for anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day. And then later on, you can see in September, a couple of months later, I got the wall done and the tree behind there, it's turning green. See in this picture, it's green. Now it's turned yellow. And then we put cool lights in the doorway because I'm an artist and I like things to be beautiful. So there's my daughter smiling. And then here we are, and we've got all the beds formed to grow the food in, and we're ready to put the plastic on. So we got a crew of people together, and we put the plastic on. Here we are installing it, and that's what it looks like on the inside. And we're getting the roll-up vent on that side, and this is one of the main things for a greenhouse, is you got to get your venting system to work really well. So the air heats up, and then it rises up 10 feet out of this this roll-up vent. Tools are a big deal. If you're paying labor to work on your farm and people are walking around looking for tools, have a place where the tools always go so that they know where stuff is. So that's right inside the door of the greenhouse. But you can see the rock work there. Those were the stones I was picking up in that previous pitch earlier. Now, this is a classroom. This is where I teach my classes, a lot of them. So we made a patio area for classes. So if you come to boot camp in a couple of weeks, you can come in here and learn how we do all this. But in the background, you can see that I have tarps on there. And so we sprinkled this. I saturated the ground completely with water with sprinklers. And then I covered the whole thing with black silage tarps. And then all the weeds germinated and they grew. So that when I moved the tarp off, they had already died. Then I didn't have a weed problem. Here I am, and I was getting mad because I didn't have enough space to put the transplanting trays. So if you look over here above that little green greenhouse, there's wasted space up there. And so I built a table up on top of there, and hopefully we see that in another picture. But this picture right here is where I had my my very first harvest. And so this was in the middle of the winter. This was the 4th of January of 2021. And we harvested lettuce, spinach, kale, radishes. And you can see me moving the tarp off strategically. And each time I plant new things, I would just roll the tarp back and plant new stuff. And here's our compost cellar. So this is what I was talking about with the root cellar. And this is the day I built that. People love the greenhouse. When visitors come, they're always attracted to the rock walls. There I am just working in there. This picture is great because you can see the vent working. So on my right side, on the left side of your screen there, above, you can see how the vents open and air can go out. And then on the other side, you can see that the vents open on that side. And so the air comes in and then just flows out. And it works very, very good. It was only 5 degrees warmer in this greenhouse in the hottest days of summer than it was outside, which is excellent. Absolutely wonderfully excellent. Because that's one of the biggest problems with greenhouses is if they get too hot in the summer, things die. So that's how it looked last summer inside the greenhouse. We had a big jungle of all kinds of beautiful food that we grew. So here we are. Yeah, just more stuff. There's a lot I could say about this picture, but I'm not gonna. And there's my penetrometer. Let me see what else. Yeah, this is all getting into soil health stuff. We'll cover all this stuff in later ones. There's a picture that's missing. I lost a picture. There it is. Okay, so see up above that little green greenhouse. See, now there's a table up there, so that holds all my starts. In the last 3 days, we've started like maybe 15,000. That's a big number. Maybe 8,000 starts that are up there. That table is completely filled now with stuff to go outside. Okay. Hopefully that was a resource for a solar greenhouse. If you want to learn more, you can sign up for my Patreon. It's $8 a month. And I have over 300 videos on there of how to grow stuff. And most of the videos are shot in this greenhouse. A lot of them are about the greenhouse and a lot of them are about other stuff, just how to grow food. Okay, Zeke, what's next? Hopefully that was a good answer for a resource on greenhouses.
Well, the first thing is to go back to the rainbow picture above the greenhouse so that Jasmine Hailstone can get a screenshot of it. The next question that I have written down is there are people at the moment very worried about the stability of the American food system. And I know you've already kind of addressed this. But what do you have to say to them to address that worry?
Okay, Ezekiel, let me make sure I got this question right. You're saying there are people worried about the stability of the American food system, right? Yep. And what do I think about it?
Yep. What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, you better be worried about it because it hasn't worked for generations now. There's nothing more broken than the American food system, because when we go to eat food at the grocery store, if we're not very, very careful, we will eat the wrong things and we will become sick. That's the first thing I say to you. The second thing is, because that's not what you're talking about, I realize that, but that's the most important thing. The second thing is, yes, it's broken. My good friend in up there, he lives just outside of Ogden by the Great Salt Lake. He has hundreds of dairy cows. He has a big, beautiful Holstein dairy and hundreds of acres of cropland. During COVID-19, with all the shutdowns, he was dumping his milk in the irrigation ditch because there was no semi to come pick it up. That is a broken system. The cows were making food. He was producing the milk. He was milking every day. And the milk went down the irrigation ditch because they couldn't get it to the system. So yes, I totally agree. The system is broken on all levels. Our meat system is broken. The egg system is broken. The fruit system is broken. The vegetable system is broken. The dairy industry is broken. It is all broken on about 20 levels. It's broken on most levels. The number one break is that the most people think that they are entitled to have food. If they go to the grocery store with money in their pocket, they should be able to get food to buy. That is not a human right. That is a blessing. That is a luxury of the modern world. And when a society thinks that becomes a human right to have food, then that is an indicator that we are ready to fall, because that's what happened to the Greeks 700 years BC. We can read about it in history. That's what happened to the Romans at the time of Christ. There are dozens and dozens of times in history when the mentality of people start thinking that way, and it's not very long and their system completely falls apart. So we better be worried about the food system, because it is not real. It is fake. It is a mask upon reality. So what is the solution? 2 words: grow food. If you didn't like that solution, I'll tell you 2 other words. Actually, it's 3 words. Interact with ecology. If humans were interacting with ecology and we understood that food grows spontaneously every day of the year, all over the earth, in thousands and thousands of habitats, we would be a lot healthier. And if we knew how that food would grow so easily and so beautifully without any human intervention, then all we have to do is bring what we learned from ecology into our own backyards and create a similar ecology at our own home. And then we can have an abundance of food all the time, even in the winter, because we're growing food in the abundant season and then we store it for the winter. Even squirrels know that. They're a rodent. Come on. How silly are we nowadays? Rodents are smarter than us. Okay, I got excited. All right, Zeke, go ahead and calm me down.
Well, the last question I have written down here probably won't calm you down, but it's what are your thoughts on overpopulation? Do you think that people should be moderating how many children they have or similar practices?
Oh dear. Let's change the subject. No, I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, to moderate population. What if Thomas Edison's parents had decided to not have children? Pick your greatest hero in the world. I mean, what if Mary and Joseph would have decided to not have children because there was too much population? Well, I guess that's a problem though. That didn't work. Every other example works. Okay. What if I don't know, pick your favorite person who's done the most for humanity, and just think about their parents deciding to not have kids. So I think zero population is a stupid idea. I think the very best for humanity in the future is let's have a lot of people being born, and let's do our part to educate them in the best way we possibly can. And by education, I do not necessarily mean schooling, and I certainly don't mean job training, but they need to get the best, most wonderful educations, the broadest and the deepest educations possible. And people need to chase their values, their gifts, and their talents that God that they were born with, that God endowed them with. And that's where we will find the greatest genius in this world to be able to solve the big problems that we deal with. So that's my answer.
Cool. Well, that's all the questions that I had written down. If anyone else would like to put some into chat, that'd help us out.
Everybody probably left the meeting because I was screaming so hard. I found my, let me look here. So there's lots of yeses when I asked for, do you think a famine is coming? Okay, nobody said no. There's something here about, what is this one? There's a comment here from Ephraim Brown. Commenting on Yemen recently, the chief executive of the World Food Program, David Beasley, said, "We have no choice but to take food from the hungry to feed the starving." Thank you for citing that. Thank you for doing that for me. It's just insane. It's insane. It's insane. Take food from the hungry to feed the starving. That's the, I don't know. That's the same mentality as like, let's raise the minimum wage. Remember when they raised the minimum wage a while back? So working at the post office used to be a pretty good gig. The United States Post Office, apparently run by the government. I don't know who runs it. I've never done that research, but I do know that there was a president a while back, and I don't even know who it was. I don't remember. But I know I have a lot of friends who are old and they've retired from being a postmaster or working in somehow in the post office. And then what did they do? They like now you can't get a full-time job at a post office. I mean, maybe you can, but our mailman, we have a mailman and a mail woman. The mail woman brings mail Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the man comes on Thursday and Fridays, and that's our mail. We don't have enough mail around here in our rural area. I don't think they come on Saturdays. Maybe they do, but I don't think so. I think it's a 5 days a week thing. And it's interesting because the reason we have 2 mailmen is so they don't have to pay benefits or a minimum wage to those employees, because they're not full-time, because those laws apply to full-time people. So government people make these absurd statements, and then sometimes they become laws, and then the government who makes those laws, they don't even follow the rule. The United States Post Office doesn't even hire the full-time employees and give them the benefits. And I have no idea how that works or why it works that way, but it's pretty interesting. And so this is the same insane mentality to me. Take from the food from the hungry to feed the starving. That is not a solution. The solution is to grow some food. I mean, I can prove it mathematically. Let's say that every person alive today grew as much food as they possibly could on the land that they own. And let's say that you can only work in your garden for 15 minutes a day. You could grow enough food for yourself. I know it. Let's say you could work for an hour a day. You could grow enough for 5 or 6 people. I know that to be true. Let's say you could do it for 20 hours a week, or like 40 hours, 80 hours, whatever it is. However much more time you can put into it, you can grow more food. So, and we know that mathematically. That's just a mathematical equation that is easy to understand. Except the powers that be don't understand it. Nobody's talking about it. It's as if we have become so smart and so educated that we have risen above getting our hands in the soil. I don't know. I don't get it. Okay, Ezekiel, calm me down.
Well, I have a couple of questions that are a little bit less inflammatory, maybe. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, when growing fruit trees from seed, are they all like apples and will come up tasting completely different than their parents? Or are some of them going to stay more like their parents?
Okay, the simple answer is yes. The thing to understand about this is it's more of a marketing thing from the fruit industry to say that if you plant seeds, then they will come up tasting completely different, because they didn't say it the way we read it. We read it and it says, yeah, they taste completely different. What they were really saying was, oh, they'll be completely different, like in a really bad, negative way. You know, that's more of the way that phrase would be portrayed. I mean, I know, because I've been in the industry. I understand that. I'm very familiar with that. And we don't want people to try to grow their own fruit. Here's the great thing. Some of the greatest varieties out there is because there's been really cool scientists who will plant 200 acres of apple seeds, and then it grows for a decade. And when those fruits start coming on, they go out there and they start eating these, and they find 1 or 2 trees that are excellent, that are fantastic. And then guess what they do? They clone them into thousands of trees. They trademark them, they patent them, and they put them into the system. And then we can buy those awesome fruits at the grocery store. So yes, if you want to get a fruit that is really good, you probably don't have the common person doesn't have the time, the inclination, the money to do that kind of a crazy scientific experiment, but some of the best varieties have been created that way. So sometimes you can get really lucky. That happened to my family. As a child, we had this field and we would, go down there. We had apricots, cherries, plums. We had one variety of apricots, 5 or 6 varieties of plums, 8 or 9 varieties of grapes. We've had about 10 different varieties of peaches. The white clings were the best. An old-fashioned white cling. Boy, if I could get one of those, I'd pay big money for it. They're nearly extinct, and I don't know where to find them. But and we had 2 or 3 different varieties of cherries. Well, the squirrels loved to live in those trees, and they would pick the fruit and take the nuts and bury them. Well, they buried an apricot pit one year from our apricot trees. And it was just kind of along an irrigation ditch. It wasn't causing a problem. The livestock happened to not eat it until it was big enough. And it grew into this beautiful, wonderful tree. And it had the most wonderful flavored apricots in the world. They were so good. They were large, they were juicy, they were delightful. I cannot even describe it, but every year when those apricots would ripen, and by the way, they ripened about 3 weeks later than the other apricot trees, which was interesting, but they were just awesome. They were the best. Now I will tell you the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life. The city annexed a road easement through there, and the tree was in the way and it got bulldozed over. So it's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. That tree should have been perpetuated. It should have been budded and grafted, than anything else you could do with it to perpetuate that awesome, those awesome genetics. So I wish there were more people who were creating more varieties. But there aren't a lot of people doing that nowadays. And it's sad. We need more scientists. So no, I don't want zero population. People should have big families and grow huge plots of food and feed people. Let's get some scientists to figure out some of these serious problems we deal with in the earth. And let's get some plant breeders going again.
All right. So. And the next question's related. When is the best time to separate and transplant volunteer plum trees that have clustered? And I'd bet that we'd be interested to hear about your ideas about other kinds of fruit trees that do similar things. And those trees are all about 5 feet tall right now.
So you want to dig those up during the dormant season in the springtime. So and it's springtime right now. So like right now, I don't know where you are. I can see your chat here, Charlotte. Where are you at? And so have they leafed out yet? I'm guessing they have not leafed out, but if you're in the southern United States, they probably have. But if they have buds on them, like blossoms, or some have leaves, you're probably too late to do it. So I would wait till next year if they've already broken dormancy. Yeah. I would wait till next year. So there's already leaves, some have some blossoms. So just let them grow this year, let them do their thing. Then next year, before they break dormancy, dig them out. If you have some right now that don't have leaves on them yet, like if you dig them tomorrow and make it happen, you could do it. As long as they're not blooming yet. And by blooming, I mean flowers or leaves. But once the leaves are coming out and you try to move them, it usually will kill the trees. Not always, but it stresses them out. Okay. Any more questions? If there's no more questions here tonight, I think we're going to wrap this up. But I have a few more minutes. If you want to type in a question, we will certainly try to talk about it. I want you guys to have really good, beautiful, awesome.
I was just sent I was direct sent a question.
Okay, let's hear it.
What cereal grain is the most drought resistant? Asking for the Great Basin, the Western Great Basin.
Rye. Cereal rye. It's the most drought resistant of all the grains. So that's, yeah, cereal rye. That's the one to grow. I wanted to end up on a slide and I don't know where it is. Huh.
Here's another question. What are some suggestions on how I can get my twig fruit trees to flourish?
Twig fruit trees. I guess that means little tiny baby ones, huh? Plant them in a functioning
says
soil.
Your interpretation's correct.
Yeah, just plant them in a functioning soil. That's the best way. That's what you want to do. If you don't know what a functioning soil is, watch the recording on my YouTube channel from last week, and we talk about the 5 spheres within the soil. Once you get those 5 spheres going really good, then all plants will flourish. It's a tree, so you're going to want to have plenty of fungus in the soil. So you need to have mulch around the tree on the surface of the soil of wood chips and woody things like that. So yeah, that's how you get the baby trees to grow good, is to have good levels of fungus in the soil. And the way that you get the fungus in the soil is by having a really good compost. And the only way to get good compost that I know of is to make it yourself. Because if you buy the junk that they sell, it's usually not good compost. There's some good companies out there, and I don't mean to put them down. I just don't know who they are, but I have faith that they exist. Okay, here's my page I like to show every week. Boot camp is coming up in 2 weeks. It's coming right up. I still have room. You can sign up. You can come to boot camp. If you bring extra people, I do give discounts. So if you bring 5 people or whatever, I will give you certain discounts. So just get a hold of me. You can go to georgiarevolution.com for the information about these classes. But we have wonderful classes we're teaching this year in our educational programs here on the ranch. But our goal of this is to help you guys have the very best gardens ever. This class is going to continue along for quite a while. So share this free Thursday night webinar. It's actually a Zoom call with your friends and family, so that I can help you have the best gardens in the world. If you want to get right into my video library, it's $8 a month, and you go to patreon.com/William DeMille, and you can have access. So by paying $8, you have access to hundreds of videos and a few articles that I have written on how to grow food. And you can ask me specific questions. I might even be able to make some videos specifically about the questions you ask, depending on the nature of the question. So if there are any more questions tonight, I will answer them right now. And let me turn on my chat here. Ezekiel, did we get any more questions?
Yes, we do.
Read them to me. Thanks.
Yes. Melanie Fisher says, buds does not mean leafing out, does it, on fruit trees?
Yes, buds mean leaf out. Buds means fruit blossoms. Budding means both, because you can have either a leaf bud or a flower bud. There's 2 different kinds of buds on all trees. There is the fruiting bud, which is a flower blossom, and there is a leaf bud that is the leaf. And when you are trying to get the tree to do specific things, it's very important to know the difference in those 2 terms. So that was a very good question. Thank you for asking.
Follow up to that, is it too late to use copper sulfate then?
I never use copper sulfate, so I don't know. The chemical world is a world that I do not deal with, so I have no idea. Even if that one is approved for organic stuff, I don't use any of those things. So even if some people are offended when I say that, because they say, oh, it's certified organic. Well, that's fine. It still is not a world I deal with. So I don't know. I can't answer that.
Another question. I have 4 onions that have long green sprouts on them. What can I do with them now? I assume we're talking about onions that were in the pantry.
You can chop up any green onion that begins to grow, like the bulb onion, and it starts growing sprouts. You could plant it and let it grow outside, and it'll put up a seed, and then you can save the seeds off of it and replant it. It might be against the law if it was a patented variety, but in times of famine, who's going to care about that? The other thing is you can chop up those greens for green onions. They're still totally edible. You can eat those.
And what do you use to keep bugs out of fruit? I assume we're still talking about fruit trees and the little bugs that get in them.
I try if I have. So anytime you have a pest in fruit trees, in anything, in a garden, in an orchard, anywhere, it means there's an ecological problem. So, and you could have an invasive species, like the codling moth is an invasive species. And so that's a problem. And so we need to be careful when we're traveling, not to bring invasive species around, because it can take a decade or two for the natural system to come up with predators for those things. One of the problems with the codling moth in fruits, and those are the little wormy apple things. So a big problem to those guys is that we spray the trees so much that it kills all the beneficials, and it disrupts the natural cycle of the predators being able to realize that they can prey on the invasive species that are causing the problems. So as far as spraying the trees, there's a lot of different dormant oil sprays you could use on trees, which are pretty safe. I've actually never done it, but during the growing season, if you have a lot of diversity, it certainly helps. Like if you had a large flock of chickens in your orchard, they would eat the worm stages, the larval stages of the moth, not while they're in the apple, but when they're in the litter on the ground underneath the trees, they would eat those. And so that's part of the codling moth cycle, is they winter over in the ground, and then when they hatch, they like go into the air and they're flying around, and then they lay their eggs on the fruit, and then you get the wormy apple. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a really good answer for that. But if you do have really bad infestations in fruit, then what's happening is that's an ecological indicator saying that you don't have enough diversity. You don't have enough complexity in your ecosystem. So you need to bring in more species, all kinds of other species. I would plant, if you could get a mix, like a hummingbird mix, a butterfly mix, and a honeybee mix, those 3 mixes of wildflowers, and plant them all over the place. If you're in an urban setting, that's harder to do. Part of all the plants we planted in the last 2 days, the seeds that we've planted, like right behind me here, I have 1,100 different flowers that are growing that produce all kinds of flowers for all kinds of insects, because we want more insects. So if you have a problem with insects, do like Alan Savory said and make the problem bigger, because what the problem is, you have one insect that's causing a problem, but you don't have 1,800 beneficial insects. So we need to bring more insects in so that nature can take care of itself. I have no idea if that answered the question. Zeke, what's next?
I got a direct message on this topic.
Okay.
They want to know if like with mulberry plants, we should just embrace certain bugs as the natural life cycle of the fruit. For instance, certain cherries have wasps that have a symbiotic relationship with the cherries and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah, that's true, but I don't know what to say.
I guess the question is that something that we should just embrace and not try to fix? Don't try to get rid of the bugs? Or do you think that it can still be ecologically sound to try and get fruit without bugs?
I mean, you have a fruit tree, you're trying to grow fruit. Obviously, you don't want it to all be destroyed by insects. So there's a balance. Certainly, spraying a fruit tree is not like a horrible, terrible thing. It's just that I'm not the right expert to ask in that field, because that's not a world I live in. I live in a more ecological, in an ecological world. That's my background. That's the science that I study. And so, yeah, I mean, there are those symbiotic relationships. The thing that has really broken the system is by spraying for all of these bad bugs. Like we target 3 bad bugs and we kill 1,800 beneficials, and it doesn't work out very good for the ecosystem. And it's just like with the varroa mites and the honeybees. You can go to the Midwest today and catch wild colonies of honeybees that are completely varroa mite free, because they've learned how to deal with it in the past 20 years of that invasive species of that mite coming to the United States. But still, you buy bees that people are producing. Well, they've been taking really good care of their honeybees every year, trying to come up with all these things. And so those bees have not, the survival of the fittest hasn't happened. So yeah, I mean, we do need to embrace ecology so that it can work for us. At the same time, there's things that we need to do to try to get a crop of food. So this is a tough one, and I don't have a good answer for you, and I apologize for that.
Are there any beneficial vegetables, and I guess we should include fruits, to plant around fruit trees?
Oh, yes, yes. Diversity, diversity, diversity. You should, like I said, you need to have 2 or 3 if you have a yard that's a quarter of an acre, you should have probably 40 or 50 different species growing on your land minimum. If you had 200 species growing there, you would have a lot less pest and disease and insect problems. The more plant diversity you can have, the better. Your yards should look like jungles. People are going to hate me for saying that, because people want a manicured yard. They're thinking of an English cottage garden where everything is trimmed and cut. And that's one aesthetic that people love. That's fine. I'm not against that. But if you want to have like really good companion planting that actually works, you need to have hundreds and hundreds of different species growing. Any species that will grow in your area, you should be cultivating it. Obviously, this is easier to do if you have acres and not just a yard, but you want all kinds of stuff growing, because with all those different things growing, then the ecosystem will begin to work much better, because you need the opportunity for the if one species isn't doing its job, you need the complexity in that system so that some other species can fill in and do that function for them. But if nothing's there, like the Sahara, then nothing else will grow. Go plant one plant in the Sahara. Is it going to grow? No, it's not. Even if you watered it, it would struggle, because it needs a community of hundreds of things. So yeah, so what beneficials to plant around fruit trees? Plant phacelia, plant alliums of all kinds, garlic, onions, shallots, plant dill, thyme, rosemary. And you need cereals in the ground. You need your tap roots. You need to be planting horseradish and parsnips, carrots, daikons, mighty mustards. And we need to let these things go to seed. A lot of people don't think it looks trashy when stuff goes to seed, but let all kinds of things go to seed. Raise a big crop of carrots, let them over winter, put some bales of hay on them so that they don't winter kill. And then in the springtime, move the bales off, let those go to seed. Save your seed from those guys. And then what you're doing with 200 or 300 varieties in your garden is you are attracting 8,000 or 9,000 species of insects, which are going to be bringing in millions, hundreds of millions of types of bacterias, protozoas, nematodes, microarthropods that will all be in the soil. Diversity, diversity, diversity. That is your answer to any problems you're having. If you're having a problem with an insect or a disease, then I can almost guarantee that you don't have enough diversity of plants and insects and animal life in your farm. Any more, Ezekiel?
If you were doing a fall garden, when should one plant in Utah? July, August?
Yeah, get all your stuff started in July and August. If you're going to grow bulb fennel, plant it right after June 21st. Anything that you want to bulb up, planting after the summer solstice, which is June 21st, that's a great time to start your plants. Sometimes I will start my seeds in, say, like around June 20th, and then the transplants are ready to be transplanted in July, maybe 15th, July 20th, depending on how big you want your transplants. And then we get those going outside and they're growing and they're thriving. Like cabbages that I was talking about, I would plant those in June. I'd start the seeds in June, and then they're ready to harvest for your root cellar. So you have 30 cabbages in your root cellar to go through the winter. And you'd harvest those in, 1st of October or whatever. But you say in Utah's a big place with a lot of different climates. Yeah, so if you're in St. George, Utah, you're in the border of the Mojave Desert, I would plant later. I would start my seeds instead of June 20th, I'd start them in like the 1st of August. So you got to take your climate into consideration. So cabbage starts, yeah, so I see your thing here in the chat. So cabbage starts, I'd put them outside like when they're 6 weeks old. So if I started them in June, so 2 weeks of June and then like 4 weeks of July. So the last week of July or the first week of August, I'd put them out. Here again, if you're in St. George, it's too hot because the poor little cabbages would burn up in the Mojave sun of July. I mean, yeah, if you're setting them out in August. So Utah County, so that's the Provo area, right? So yeah, I would probably set cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, collards, all that stuff. I would put fall stuff out there in probably the first week of August. And it's always a risk. Farming's always a risk, but if you had a really beautiful, nice, well-grown transplant and you put it out in the 1st of August in the Provo area, that'd probably be okay. If they had some afternoon shade, that'd probably be good. If you're just talking about a garden where you have 10 or 15 plants, you can put some shade on them. They're going to be fine. Put a floating row cover on them, the same that you'd put on in the winter. So they have some shade. That'd be great. Yeah. If you're doing Brussels sprouts, they take a little bit longer. And so you would want to start those a little bit earlier so that you'd plant them earlier because they take a little longer. So potatoes in Utah County. Plant them probably right now. Are you guys getting a snowstorm right now, or did you yesterday? As soon as I'd plant them soon. I mean, May 1st is right around the corner. For a fall crop, plant them right now. Grow them all summer, because the longer they grow, the bigger your potatoes will get. So I'd plant them all. Yeah, get them going the 1st of May. Keep them watered good. Grow them all year. And I would plant 10 varieties too. Plant a whole bunch of varieties. You know, you may have one variety you really love and it's great, but I'm assuming that since you're asking me these questions, that you are probably sort of new to gardening. I'm making that assumption. So I would say get as many varieties as you can, like not hundreds, but get 10 varieties and plant them, and then see which ones do the best for you this year. Okay, our time is up. Thank you for joining this. Go to my website, georgicrevolution.com, and sign up for boot camp. We have room. You could come here and I'll teach you everything you need to know to grow your food. All right, Ezekiel, should we close up shop and come back next week, or do we need to talk about anything else?
Oh, sounds good. Let's close her down. Anybody who wants to, anybody who needs to ask a question, come prepared next week, put it in the chat or shoot us an email.
Thank you.
You guys are so welcome. Thank you, everybody.
I just put my email in the chat so you can send messages to me and ask questions if you'd like.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.
Good night.